In the quiet elegance of his sprawling home, Elon Musk narrated his life as though it had been carefully sketched in blueprints, measured, structured, predictable. To the world, he was a man of unshakable vision, a pioneer who dared to chase distant planets while others clung to the safety of the familiar. But within the walls of his own house, there existed another story, a life less grand, less attended to. A life that had slowly wilted, like vines left too long, without pruning. His two daughters, Alexis and Sophie, were the only ones who truly belonged to this quiet narrative. They were his gravitational pull, though he had not yet mastered how to orbit around them. Helen, his wife, had always been the steady sun at the center. Her absence had left him untethered, drifting between commitments and regrets. It had all unraveled on a morning that seemed, at first glance, to promise nothing but calm. Helen had set out on her usual cycling route through the rolling trails of Sonoma, the air crisp with the scent of damp earth and distant vineyards. She had pedaled those paths countless times, her laughter echoing against the green silence. But life, Elon would soon learn, needs no reason to change its course. The call came in fragments, a stranger's voice, wind-blown and trembling. An accident, a collision, paramedics, hospital. When Elon arrived at the emergency room, his mind was still grasping for logic, still searching for the numbers that might explain why a woman so full of life could now lie motionless under sterile, white sheets. Helen's chest rose and fell mechanically, her dark hair fanned out across the pillow like ink spilled on snow. The machines hummed faithfully, but the doctor spoke softly of words like irreversible and non-responsive. Weeks slipped by, but the monitors told the same story. It wasn't living, it wasn't leaving, it was something in between. Elon became, overnight, a father alone, a role he had always shared, sometimes imperfectly, but never carried on his own shoulders. Alexis, his eldest, was far from home, chasing a life that moved faster than the one she left behind. Independent to the bone, she answered his calls with distracted sighs and promises to visit that always dissolved into apologies. Her rebellion was not loud, but it was deliberate. Sophie, the youngest, was still home, her small frame carrying more questions than Elon could bear to answer. "Will Mom come back, Daddy?" He would fold her in his arms, sometimes too tightly, sometimes with a silence that unsettled them both. "I don't know, sweetheart. I just don't know." In between business meetings, launches, and headlines, Elon carved out time, thin, fragile time, to sit by Helen's bedside. The hospital room became his confessional. He spoke of the girls, of the house that felt too big now, of the vineyard in Sonoma that everyone wanted him to sell. The vineyard. It was a stretch of earth passed down like a reluctant heirloom, 200 acres of soil, vines, and crumbling fences pressed between his family's history and the advancing shadow of commercial developers. His cousins had made their position clear: sell. The land was a relic, an untapped fortune waiting to be freed from its roots. But Elon hesitated. The land had always belonged to someone else, and yet now it belonged to him. In truth, he didn't know what the land meant to him. His life had been a pursuit of distant skies, of electric roads, of futures written in algorithms. But this vineyard, was something altogether different. It demanded not vision, but presence. Not ambition, but patience. One evening, as golden lights stretched long across the sterile floor of Helen's room, the doctor's words settled over him like dust. "Mr. Musk, I'm so sorry. Helen won't wake up. There's nothing more we can do." His throat tightened, but no tears came. Not yet. The weight of those words was not immediate. It seeped into him slowly, filling the hollow spaces he had carefully built around his life. It meant phone calls to friends, to family. It meant shattering the fragile hope Alexis still clung to. It meant explaining to Sophie, in words small enough for her to hold, that some goodbyes happen without sound. But what it meant most of all was this: he could no longer outrun the vineyard. Helen's absence would now spill into that soil, into those gnarled vines. Whether he chose to keep the land or let it go, it would be a decision he could no longer make in haste or by convenience. It was, perhaps, the last place that still held the echo of her laughter. That night, Elon drove to Sonoma. The vineyard greeted him with silence, the rows of dormant vines standing like solemn witnesses to all he had ignored. He walked the dusty paths as the evening chilled, his hand brushing the coarse bark of the old grapevines. In the stillness, his thoughts turned not to Mars, nor to satellites, but to the delicate fabric of a life that had always been closer than he realized. A life stitched into these fields, into his daughter's eyes, into Helen's quiet legacy. The land had never asked for his ambition. It had only asked to be seen, to be tended, to be loved. Elon stood at the crest of the hill as dusk surrendered to night. For the first time in years, he allowed the silence to settle around him, not as an absence, but as an invitation. The vineyard was waiting, and so, perhaps, were the parts of his life he had left untended. Dear viewer, if this story is planting something gentle in your heart, if you felt even a small ache or curiosity, please consider giving this video a like. And if you wish to walk further with us through this vineyard of memories, you are warmly invited to subscribe. I'd love to meet you again in the next chapter. The road to Alexis's school stretched endlessly, each mile pressing down on Elon like a slow, tightening vice. He could have sent someone, a driver, an assistant, even a brief phone call might have sufficed. But this he needed to do himself. There are journeys that only a father can take, though he feared he might be arriving years too late. When he reached the campus, he found her waiting, her posture rigid, her gaze distant. Alexis Musk, 18, sharp-edged and brilliantly stubborn, stood apart from her peers like a stone unmoved by the current. Her dark hair was pinned haphazardly, her backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She simply watched him, guarded. Elon stepped out of the car, smoothing his shirt as if the gesture could erase the years he'd been absent in all but name. "Lex, I'm here to bring you home." Her arms crossed instinctively. "Why? Because now you need me to play house? Because you can't juggle Sophie and the company at the same time?" Her words, though quiet, struck cleanly. Elon had prepared for distance, but not for this sharp, simmering ache. "No," he said carefully, "because your mother, she's not coming back. And I think you should be with us now. With Sophie. With me." Alexis let out a breath that trembled at the edges. She didn't argue. She simply walked past him and climbed into the passenger seat, her silence a fortress he wasn't sure he could breach. The drive back to Sonoma was a quiet, restless journey. Fields and fences slid by, but neither seemed to notice. Elon glanced at her, wishing he could ask where she'd learned to hold her anger so tightly. Later that evening, with Sophie asleep and the house submerged in that fragile quiet that comes after a child's bedtime, Alexis dropped her secret like a stone into still water. She was having an affair. Elon turned, his hand stilling on the teapot he was preparing. "What?" "She was seeing someone," Alexis said, her voice steady but her fingers tugging at the cuff of her sleeve. "While you were off saving the world, she was with someone else." The room shrank, his breath caught somewhere in the hollow of his chest. "Alexis, that can't." "She told me," Alexis interrupted, her jaw clenching. "I wasn't supposed to know, but I did. And the worst part, you didn't even notice. You weren't there to notice." Her words sliced through the polished surface of his grief, exposing something raw beneath. The image of Helen, the woman who had filled their home with her quiet laughter, who had kissed him goodbye as he left for yet another launch, suddenly became blurred by shadows he hadn't seen. The bitterness in Alexis's eyes wasn't new, but now it had a shape. A target. "Do you know who it was?" he asked, the words almost strangled. Alexis shrugged, though her throat tightened. "Not yet, but I think we should find out. Don't you want to know who he was? Don't you think you deserve to know who you were losing her to?" Elon lowered himself into a chair, pressing his hands together, as if trying to hold himself intact. Anger, confusion, sorrow, all of them churned inside him like an unsettled storm. And yet there was Sophie. Sweet, curious Sophie, still too young to carry the weight of betrayal, still tiptoeing around the tension she didn't understand. Elon forced a calmness he didn't feel. "We won't talk about this around her." "Agreed?" Alexis nodded, but the firmness in her gaze did not soften. "But we'll talk about it. We have to." In the days that followed, Elon began a quiet search, a reluctant excavation of his wife's final months. He reached out to Helen's friends, old cycling partners, fellow volunteers at the Vineyard co-op, distant acquaintances from her pottery class. The pattern of her days slowly unfurled before him, a tapestry of small details he'd never cared to know. A coffee shop she frequented without him. A trail she biked, not on the weekends, but on quiet Wednesday mornings. Phone calls made when he was abroad. He searched through her emails, her photographs, her journals, feeling like an intruder in the life of a woman he thought he knew. Guilt bloomed like wildflowers in his chest. How had he been so absent? How had he let the distance grow so wide? Through the cracks in their shared grief, something unexpected began to emerge, a fragile thread reconnecting him to Alexis. Their conversations, though often sharp, grew longer. He saw beneath her rebellion the bruises of a daughter who had once waited for him to come home, for him to care enough to notice her. She wasn't angry because Helen had fallen for another. She was angry because neither of her parents had fought to stay. One evening, as Elon sorted through old papers in Helen's study, Alexis appeared in the doorway. "You're not as bad at this as I thought you'd be," she said, arms crossed but her voice lighter. "At what?" he asked without looking up. "Being around. Being a dad." Elon met her eyes, and for a fleeting second, they saw each other, not as adversaries, but as two people fumbling through the same darkness. Sophie, oblivious to the delicate shifts between them, continued to orbit her father and sister with innocent curiosity. She played in the vineyard, asked endless questions about the grapes, about the stars, about why grown-ups sometimes cried when they thought no one was watching. The search for Helen's lover became more than a hunt for a name. It became a journey through Helen's life, through their shared past, through the spaces where Elon had not dared to linger. In those quiet drives through California, as the three of them followed faint clues from coffee shops to cycling trails, from the coastline to forgotten bed and breakfasts, something softened between them. The ache remained, but it no longer stood between them, it walked with them. What began as a pursuit to uncover betrayal slowly transformed into a deeper, more fragile quest to understand who Helen truly was and who they were without her. Elon had once believed that the future was built in distant factories, in starships and algorithms. But as Alexis rested her head, just for a moment, against the car window beside him, he began to suspect that the future might also be built in quieter places, in the fragile, unfinished conversations between fathers and daughters. The name sat between them like a stone. Alexis finally said it aloud as they sat beneath the gnarled oak in the backyard, the vineyard stretching endlessly behind them. "Brian Caldwell." Elon repeated the name under his breath, as though saying it quietly might soften its edges. The name meant nothing to him at first, just another face in a town full of men he never bothered to know. But Alexis knew. She had pieced it together, following her mother's calendar entries, overheard calls, lingering glances during community events. "He's a real estate broker. Married. 2 kids," she said, her voice flat but laced with something sharp beneath it. "And he's been pushing hard on the family to sell the vineyard." Elon frowned. "You think that's why?" "I don't know," Alexis cut in. "But the more I looked, the more it made sense. If we sell, Brian stands to make fortune. It's all tangled up, his company, the developers, even some of the people Dad calls cousins." Elon's stomach churned. The betrayal was no longer confined to the quiet, invisible space between Helen and another man. It now stretched outwards, laced with suspicion, money, and the oldest story in business, power. But he didn't feel rage. Not yet. Not fully. Instead, he felt a strange compulsion to see the man, to stand before him, not as a competitor or a wounded husband, but as someone searching for the last missing piece of a story he no longer controlled. "I need to find him," Elon said, his voice low, steady. Not for revenge, for understanding. He decided to take the girls to the family's Sonoma estate, presenting it to Sophie as a spontaneous vacation and to Alexis as a veiled mission they both understood. The house in Sonoma hadn't changed. The same sprawling verandas, the same dusty shutters. The vineyards, thick with late summer, rolled out in precise rows, their clusters of grapes ripening under a sky that seemed too wide for Elon's narrowed thoughts. The cousins welcomed them with carefully measured warmth. They had long wanted the sale. To them, Elon's hesitation wasn't noble, it was inconvenient. "We've got buyers lined up," one cousin said, brushing soil from his jeans as they walked the vineyard trails. "Developers who can transform this place. You can't hold on to the past forever, Elon." But Elon wasn't so sure anymore. As he walked those rows, the scent of the earth rising to meet him, the weight of memory began to outweigh the pull of money. The land had held weddings and funerals. It had seen Sophie's first steps, Alexis's first fall. And somewhere in those quiet corners, Helen's laughter still lingered. Sophie dashed through the vines, her giggles catching on the breeze as she gathered wildflowers into a clumsy bouquet. She was untouched by the labyrinth of adult grief. Her world was still bright, uncomplicated, filled with the magic of butterflies and warm soil. Alexis, in contrast, watched Elon more closely now. She followed his pauses, noted the way his hands lingered on the grape leaves as though he were reading them. She didn't say it aloud, but something in her had softened. For the first time in years, she saw her father not as a figure distant and unreachable, but as a man unsure of his own footing. One evening, as the cousins pressed again for his signature, dangling numbers too large to ignore, Elon finally voiced the quiet truth that had been growing in him. "If I sell this land, I don't just lose property. I lose the last place where we were whole. I lose her." The room quieted, the clinking of glasses faltering. But there was more. The land, if sold, would funnel profits to Brian Caldwell. That was the bitter root twisting beneath all of this. The next day, armed with scattered information from local friends, Elon learned that Brian often vacationed with his family at a nearby resort along the Sonoma coast. It was quiet, unpretentious, just enough distance from the town to keep secrets undisturbed. Elon decided they would go. The drive was silent but charged. Sophie napped in the back seat, her small frame folded beneath a soft blanket. Alexis sat beside him, her arms crossed, but her walls slightly lowered. "Do you know what you'll say to him?" she asked, staring out the window. "No," Elon admitted. "But I know I need to see him. I need to understand why." Alexis didn't press further. Some journeys, she now realized, can't be rehearsed. The resort was perched on a cliff's edge where the vineyard-draped hills met the restless push of the Pacific. It was a place of quiet affluence. Families strolled the shaded paths. Children's laughter punctuated the breeze. They didn't have to search long. Elon spotted him near the waterfront, a man in his mid-40s, athletic, sun-kissed, wearing the effortless confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. Brian walked hand in hand with his wife, their children skipping ahead, oblivious to the stories their parents carried. For a long moment, Elon simply stood there watching. Here was the man who had occupied the hidden corners of Helen's heart. Here was the man whose life remained intact, untouched by the collapse that had rearranged Elon's world. He felt no searing anger, only a dense, aching curiosity. Who was this man? Was he a passing shadow in Helen's life, or had he been something more? Elon's hands curled into reluctant fists at his sides. Should he walk forward, confront him here, in the soft glow of a family weekend? Or should he observe, gather what he could from a distance, and decide later how to close this chapter? Alexis, watching her father's hesitation, placed a hand lightly on his arm. "You don't have to go now," she said softly. "You don't have to decide everything today." Elon glanced at her, surprised by the gentleness in her voice. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that she wasn't there to push him forward. She was there to walk with him, whatever pace he chose. The breeze tugged at his shirt as he lingered at the edge of the pathway, suspended between action and silence, between knowing and waiting. And so he stayed there, just for a while longer, watching the other man. Elon hadn't planned the meeting. It unfolded almost by accident, a slow morning near the resort's cafe, where the ocean breeze pulled softly at the white tablecloths and time seemed to move a little more kindly. Julia Caldwell was there, her 2 children darting between the tables, her hands busy with napkins and juice boxes. She was radiant in a quiet, uncomplicated way. Brown hair gathered loosely, soft lines at the corners of her eyes, the sort that came from years of smiling. Elon approached casually, as though he were just another father making polite conversation by chance. "Beautiful morning," he offered, his voice calm, measured. Julia glanced up, surprised but welcoming. "It really is. We try to come here every summer. It's our favorite spot." Elon nodded, his hands resting awkwardly in his pockets. "I've heard the coastline here is one of the most peaceful in Sonoma." "It is. The kids love it. And my husband, he's obsessed with the trails around here. He's probably off somewhere now, getting lost on purpose." There was a door cracked open. Elon smiled faintly, though something sharp twisted inside him. He sounds like he really knows this place. Julia's brow furrowed briefly, as if catching the faint tremor beneath his words. "He does. Brian's worked around here for years. Real estate mostly. He's always got half his mind on work, even on vacation." Elon paused, the question resting on his tongue, the truth pressing at the edges of his restraint. But he didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he let something else fall gently into the air between them. "It must be strange," he said quietly, "when the places we love become part of the places we work." Julia tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "I suppose. But Brian keeps it balanced. I trust him." Something in her voice made Elon ache. There was no calculation in her words. No schild. Only the simple, unwavering trust of a woman who believed her life was whole. He left her with a polite nod, never mentioning Helen's name, never revealing his tether to the man who occupied both his memories and his anger. But as he walked away, he knew he had left something behind, a question, faint and unfinished, growing quietly in Julia's mind. That evening, Elon watched Brian from afar, a husband laughing with his wife, chasing his children through the shallow waves. The scene gnawed at him. How much did Brian know? Had Helen been a passing distraction, or something he'd fought to keep? Did Julia truly deserve the truth? Or would it only break a life that, despite its flaws, still had some semblance of joy? His fists tightened in his pockets, but he didn't move. Later, as the sun dipped behind the vineyards, Sophie tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, why are we here? Why are we watching that man's family?" Elon knelt to meet her eyes, the question piercing deeper than she could ever know. "We're just visiting places your mother loved," he said gently. "Sometimes it helps to remember." She accepted the answer, her child's heart satisfied with a comfort she could hold. But Alexis, standing nearby, was not so easily appeased. "You should tell her," Alexis whispered sharply, her arms crossed, her eyes blazing. "Julia deserves to know. You can't just walk away from this and ruin her life." Elon shot back, his voice a shade too sharp. "What would that accomplish? You think exposing him would bring your mother back? That it would fix anything?" Alexis's lip quivered, but her resolve did not falter. Maybe it wouldn't fix anything, but at least it would be honest. Elon looked at her, truly looked, and realized what he saw was not defiance. It was a desperate plea for something to be solid, for something to make sense. But he feared that the truth, in the wrong hands, could become another fracture, another orphan family. The vineyards of Sonoma stretched around them, their quiet beauty indifferent to his inner war. The air smelled of ripening fruit, of sun-warmed soil, of promises made long ago and never fully kept. The peace of the landscape only made his turmoil sharper. That night, unable to sleep, Elon sat at the small desk in the guest room, pen in hand, and began to write to Helen. Not to accuse, not to blame, but to speak, finally, after so many years of silence. The words flowed unevenly at first, then poured in aching waves. You drifted away from me in steps so small I didn't see them. I was building rockets, chasing the sky, while you were folding laundry alone in quiet rooms. I failed you. I failed to be where I should have been. But I loved you, Helen. Maybe I never said the right way. Maybe I built cathedrals out my work instead of our life. But I loved you. I still do. I don't know what he gave you that I didn't. Maybe he gave you time. Maybe he just noticed. And maybe I would hate him if I didn't understand that sometimes people go searching when the door they knock on stays closed for too long. I wanted to know why, but I realize now, it doesn't matter as much as I thought it did. You made your choices, and I made mine. But I will not let the last thing I give our daughters be another story about revenge. The letter became a kind of bomb, softening the walls he had built, revealing spaces in his own heart he'd never cared to enter. When morning came, Elon folded the letter and tucked it into his jacket pocket. It wasn't for anyone else, perhaps not even for Helen. It was simply a confession long overdue. In the days that followed, Julia's smile became thinner. She began to watch Brian more closely. Small inconsistencies surfaced, phone calls he waved off, absences he couldn't quite explain. The seeds Elon had unknowingly planted had begun to grow. The quiet grace of Sonoma, once a backdrop, now became a stage where the silence between them grew heavier. Time was running out. Elon could feel it. The delicate balance between omission and revelation was starting to fray. His daughters, in different ways, waited for him to choose. Would he confront Brian? Would he tell Julia? Would he carry the burden alone, or let the truth ripple beyond him? He stood once more at the edge of decision, the vineyard rising around him like a living witness. Some truths demand to be spoken. Others are meant to be carried. The meeting was not planned, but Elon had known it was inevitable. He found Brian Caldwell near the edge of the resort's coastal path, where the vineyards gave way to the restless push of the sea. The breeze tugged at their shirts, carrying the scent of salt and late summer vines. Elon approached without ceremony, his steps firm, his breath steady, though something unspoken trembled beneath his skin. Brian turned, surprised to find Elon standing so close. "Can I help you with something?" he asked, his voice polite, distant. Elon's eyes narrowed, but his tone remained composed. "I know who you are, Brian. I know about Helen." For a brief second, Brian's practiced calm flickered. "I think you might be." "Stop," Elon said, his voice sharper now. "Don't insult either of us with a lie. I know about the Wednesday mornings, the cycling trails, the bed-and breakfast near the coastal highway. I know about the phone calls, the half-days when you disappeared from your office." Brian's shoulders tensed, his mouth twitching as if searching for the right version of the truth to tell. "I'm not here to drag this into the light," Elon continued, his words cold but precise. "But I thought you should know Helen's dying. She's in a coma. She won't wake up." Something passed through Brian's expression, a flash of disbelief, quickly masked by something more practical, more self-preserving. His grief, if it existed, was carefully measured. "I see," Brian finally said. I'm sorry. Truly." Elon studied him, waiting to feel the righteous anger he had expected, the burning satisfaction of confrontation. But it didn't come. Instead, there was a hollow sort of ache, like standing in an abandoned house where echoes should have been. Brian shifted his weight, his voice softening. "Look, it wasn't what you think. It wasn't love. It was an escape. For both of us, I think. Just something passing." The words landed with a weight Elon hadn't prepared for. He had braced for passion, for some grand confession of stolen hearts. Instead, he was offered something smaller, colder. An affair of convenience. A betrayal without poetry. "You're telling me she meant nothing to you?" Elon asked, his voice low, dangerous. Brian's jaw tightened. "I didn't say that. I liked her. I really did. She was kind. She listened. But I love my family. I love my wife. Please don't take them from me." The plea was raw, but it was also self-centered. Brian wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking to be spared the consequences. "You want me to keep this secret for you?" Elon asked, almost incredulous. Brian's voice dropped to a whisper. "Yes. Please, don't destroy my home over something that's already gone." For a long moment, neither man moved. The wind swept around them, the vineyard behind them standing silent and watchful. Elon wanted to rage. He wanted to tell Julia to dismantle Brian's carefully constructed life, just as his own had crumbled. But as he stared into Brian's desperate, pleading eyes, something unexpected rose within him. Compassion. It wasn't the compassion of absolution. It wasn't sympathy. It was the quiet recognition that some burdens, once unleashed, create ripples that destroy far beyond their intended target. "Did you ever think what this would do to her?" Elon asked, his voice breaking at the edges. Brian swallowed hard. "I never meant for it to last. I never meant for it to matter this much." "But it did," Elon whispered. "It mattered to someone." Brian's silence was all the answer he needed. There would be no justice here. No clean, satisfying conclusion. Elon turned to leave. "Wait," Brian called after him, panic lacing his words. "You're not going to tell her, are you? Please." It would tear everything apart. "It's over. Let it stay buried." Elon paused, his back to the man who had unknowingly rewritten so much of his life. "I came here thinking I wanted revenge," Elon admitted. "But I don't. Not anymore." Without another word, he walked away, the weight of the moment settling into his shoulders like an old coat he would carry but never shed. From a distance, Alexis watched the exchange. She had trailed her father quietly, unwilling to let him face this alone, though she'd kept herself hidden. She had expected her father to erupt, to expose, to tear down the man who had broken their family's fragile walls. But what she saw instead was something she had not anticipated: compassion. And in that quiet restraint, in that unwillingness to multiply the pain, she saw a different kind of strength, a gentleness she had not known her father possessed. When Elon reached her, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. A softening, a shared ache, a thread pulling them, finally a little closer. "You didn't tell him you'd keep his secret," Alexis murmured, a question tucked inside her words. "No," Elon said, his voice steady but tired. "But I also didn't tell him I wouldn't." They walked back toward the vineyard, Sophie's distant laughter drifting toward them as she played among the rows of vines, blissfully unaware of the tangled histories that unfolded just out of her reach. For the first time in days, Elon felt something begin to settle in his chest. Not peace, but perhaps the beginning of it. He realized with a quiet clarity that vengeance would have chained him to Brian forever, would have made the affair the center of his story instead of a chapter he could choose to close. Some weights, he understood now, we do not lay down by punishing others. Some weights are released when we simply choose to stop carrying them. And as he walked beside Alexis, hearing the crunch of the soil beneath their feet, he allowed himself to believe, just for a moment, that they might all find their way forward without the burden of bitterness. The confrontation with Brian Caldwell had ended, not with fireworks or slammed doors, but with a quiet, decisive turning away. And when Elon Musk truly turned, it was not back toward the man who had wounded his marriage, but toward the two souls who still needed him the most, Alexis and Sophie. For the first time in many years, Elon set aside the relentless hum of business, the gravitational pull of meetings and deadlines, and walked with his daughters through the vineyard, barefoot, their feet pressing into the cool, soft earth. Sophie laughed as the soil slipped between her toes, her small hand tugging at Elon's as they wandered aimlessly through the ancient rows of vines. "Why are we walking without shoes?" Sophie asked, her giggles light and sweet. "To feel the land," Elon answered, though the words sounded new in his own mouth. "Sometimes we move so quickly we forget how to stand still." Alexis trailed slightly behind, her hoodie sleeves tugged over her hands, her gaze not quite softened but no longer sharp. She was watching him, testing his sincerity. But as the afternoon sun warmed their backs, something in her posture relaxed. Sophie stopped suddenly, crouching to pick a loose grape that had fallen to the dirt. "Daddy," she asked, her child's voice earnest, "what does it mean to belong to the land?" Elon paused. The question settled between them, weighty in its simplicity. He knelt beside her, brushing dirt from his palm. "It means the land is part of your story. And maybe, if you're lucky, you become part of its story too. But does it have to belong to us?" Sophie pressed, curiosity sparkling in her hazel eyes. Elon looked out over the vines, their green stretching like threads tying generations together. "Maybe it's not about owning it," he said slowly. "Maybe it's about caring for it." That night, the question clung to him. It followed him through the halls of the family estate, whispered to him in the quiet spaces his busyness had always drowned out. For so long, the vineyard had been numbers, logistics, legal documents, a burden he never asked for. But now, as he sat with Alexis over mugs of cooling tea, he began to see it differently. The cousins pressed harder than ever. They circled him with urgency, presenting final offers, waving contracts that shimmered with promises of staggering wealth. "This is your chance, Elon," one cousin urged. "No one would blame you. You don't even live here." But Alexis did not let the moment pass in silence. "Don't sell it," she said, her voice firm but without the edge she once carried. "Don't erase this place. It's Mom's, even if you didn't see it before. It's ours now. We can make something here. We can stay." Her words struck him deeper than she could have known. For the first time, Elon considered what staying would mean, not just geographically, but emotionally. He had spent his life fleeing from permanence, from stillness, from the raw weight of memory. But here, among these vines, there was an invitation to be present, to choose roots over rockets. He realized with a pang of guilt that he had never truly noticed the scent of the vineyard, that sweet, dusky perfume that clung to the leaves in the late afternoon. He had never listened to the soft rustling of the grapevines in the wind or noticed how the trees whispered to each other across the hills. He had been a visitor in his own story. The next morning, with the cousins assembled around the long wooden table, Elon placed the unsigned contract between them. "I've decided to keep the vineyard," he announced, his voice calm, his decision immovable. A tense silence filled the room. "Elon, this is irrational," one cousin snapped. "Do you know how much you're walking away from?" "Yes," Elon said simply. "And I know what I'm choosing instead." The cousins argued, pleaded, called him foolish. But he did not bend. When he stepped outside, the sun warming his face, Alexis and Sophie were waiting for him. Their smiles were quiet, but they held something he had not seen in them before, a sense of belonging. A sense that, finally, their father was choosing them, choosing to stay. That evening, as the sky softened into lavender, Elon visited Helen. He had visited before out of duty, out of guilt. But now he came with something else. He sat by her bedside, his hand wrapped gently around hers, and let the silence settle comfortably between them. He spoke not as the man who had failed, but as the man who had finally learned how to be still. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have said it sooner. I should have said it more." His voice cracked, but he continued. "Thank you for loving the parts of life I was too busy to see. Thank you for giving me Alexis and Sophie. I promise I will take care of them. I will take care of what you loved." For the first time, the goodbye felt real. Not as a severing, but as a quiet release. He came again the next day, and the next. No longer racing to fix what was broken, but choosing to simply be there. In the vineyard, Sophie ran between the rows, her laughter trailing behind her like a ribbon, while Alexis leaned against the old wooden fence, watching her father tend to the vines with slow, deliberate hands. "You're really staying?" Alexis asked one afternoon, as if still testing the idea. "I'm really staying," Elon replied, a quiet certainty in his voice. And as the wind moved softly through the vineyard, as the sunlight pressed gently through the leaves, Elon felt something shift, not in the world, but within himself. For the first time, he felt at home, not in the houses he had built, nor in the ships he had launched, but in the simple rhythm of belonging to the land, to his daughters, and to the life that was patiently waiting for him to arrive. The time had come. There were no more medical options, no more waiting for miracles that would not arrive. The hospital's quiet corridors, once filled with the rhythm of hopeful footsteps, now absorbed the softer, slower pace of farewells. Elon Musk organized a small, intimate gathering for Helen's final moments. It was not a formal event. There were no announcements, no polished speeches, just quiet people arriving in twos and threes, their faces lined with sadness, their words gentle and unfinished. Friends from years gone by, neighbors, distant relatives, all came to say goodbye in the language they each understood best. Some wept openly, their tears falling freely as they touched Helen's still hands. Some sat in silence, their grief expressed in the way they lingered by her side, as if time might stretch if they simply refused to rise. Others whispered words of gratitude, thanking her for laughter, for patience, for small kindnesses long ago. Each goodbye was different, but each was real. Among them came Julia Caldwell. Her entrance was quiet, almost hesitant, as though she were trespassing in a story that wasn't hers to finish. She paused at the door, waiting for Elon's acknowledgement. When their eyes met, neither of them needed to explain why she was there. Elon simply nodded, and Julia stepped forward, her gaze soft but resolute. She approached Helen's bedside, gently brushing her fingers over Helen's hand, a brief, silent gesture of goodbye. There were no words, but her presence spoke volumes. After a moment, she turned to Elon. "Thank you," Julia said softly, "for not telling me then, for letting me find my way to the truth without losing everything." Her voice trembled at the edges, but she held her composure. Elon's reply was equally quiet. It wouldn't have changed anything that mattered. We've all lost enough. Their exchange was brief, but there was a profound respect between them, two people bound by a truth that neither would carry forward as a weapon. Julia left without lingering, her farewell stitched into the silence like a thread neither of them would pull. As the day unfolded, Alexis found her father standing alone by the window. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him, not with the distance she used to maintain, but fully, without reserve. Her face pressed against his chest, and for the first time, the embrace was mutual. Elon rested his chin lightly on her hair, surprised by how natural it felt to hold her this way. There were no words exchanged. They had said enough in recent days. This was something deeper, an understanding that grief, when shared, can soften rather than harden. Sophie, too, was there, her small hand wrapped around her mother's. Her wide hazel eyes drifted over the faces in the room, reading the weight in the silence, but still not fully grasping what was unfolding. "Is Mom going to wake up now?" Sophie asked, her voice small but clear. Elon knelt beside her, swallowing against the knot in his throat. "No, sweetheart. Mom's going to rest now. She's very tired." Sophie studied her mother's peaceful face, her grip tightening just a little. She didn't cry. Not yet. Perhaps her understanding would come in pieces, in the spaces where her mother's voice used to be. And so, when the time came, Helen was disconnected from the machines that had tethered her to a life she could no longer inhabit. The nurses moved gently, reverently, as though caring for something fragile and sacred. There were no alarms, no sudden movements, only quiet, steady hands and the slow dimming of lights. Elon wept, but his tears came like slow rain, not a collapse but a release. He held himself steady, his daughters beside him, his grief full and honest, but no longer something he needed to run from. When they returned home that evening, the silence in the house had changed. It was no longer the sharp, aching absence that used to haunt the rooms. It was a softer silence, a quieter presence, as though Helen lingered still, but now as memory, not as a hollow space. In the living room, they gathered together, their movements unspoken but in rhythm. Elon chose a movie, not one of his usual documentaries or space films, but something simple, something Helen used to play on rainy afternoons. They settled on the couch, sharing a blanket. Alexis leaned into her father's side, her scuffed sneakers abandoned near the door. Sophie curled up with her head on Elon's lap, her small body finally giving in to the exhaustion of the day. They laughed at the silly parts of the movie, even when the laughter caught slightly in their throats. They passed popcorn back and forth. They stayed close, as though they had always belonged in this arrangement. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't polished, but it was whole. Helen, though gone, no longer felt like an absence. She was woven into the shape of their new life, their jokes, their rituals, the way Elon now paused to ask Alexis about her day, the way he now noticed when Sophie braided dandelions into her hair. Elon came to understand that what remained was more precious than what had been lost. The vineyard, the land, the stories they would carry forward, these were no longer burdens. They were the living fabric of his family's next chapter. One evening, as they stood together watching the sun sink behind the vines, Elon made a quiet promise, not grand, not ceremonial. "I'll take care of you," he told his daughters. "And I'll take care of what your mom loved." Alexis simply nodded, her eyes softening in the golden light. And Sophie, picking wildflowers at his feet, whispered, "I know." They didn't need to say more. Their steps, their silences, their laughter beginning to return, these would speak for them now. Together, slowly, they began to build something new. Imperfect, unfinished, but theirs. The vineyard greeted Elon Musk differently this time. There was no urgency in his step, no storm of decision waiting to be made. The silence that had once pressed heavily on his shoulders now felt gentle, familiar. He walked the winding paths between the vines slowly, deliberately, his bare hand brushing the rough bark of the grapevines as if they had long waited for his touch. The land, once a burden, now revealed its quiet language to him. The knots in the gnarled trunks, the faded paint on the weathered fence, the stone bench at the hill's crest, all whispered stories of the family that had passed here before him. His great-grandfather's initials, carved into the oldest oak, caught his eye for the first time. How many years had those letters waited unnoticed? He stopped beneath the broad shade of that oak, resting his palm on the carving. The weight of the place settled into him, not as something to carry, but as something to belong to. In the distance, Alexis and Sophie's laughter rose like birdsong across the fields. Alexis chased her little sister between the vines, their bare feet brushing the sun-warmed soil. Sophie's floral dress fluttered as she skipped ahead, a crown of wildflowers already lopsided on her head. Alexis, though older, moved with a freedom that was slowly, gently returning to her. They had begun to see the vineyard not as something inherited, but as something theirs. Elon found the cousins near the equipment shed, their postures still tense, though the sharp edges of their arguments had softened over time. They had come expecting another battle, another plea to reconsider the sale. But Elon's voice was steady, not combative. "I've made my decision," he said. "I'm not selling. This land, it isn't a line on a contract. It's the soil where my daughters will grow up. It's where Helen's memory lives now. And I've spent too long ignoring both." There was silence. One cousin shook his head, frustrated. "You're throwing away millions." Elon smiled, just faintly. "Maybe, but not everything that's valuable can be measured in dollars." Some of them walked away still in disagreement, but others stayed, their resistance beginning to melt into reluctant respect. Elon wasn't forcing a fight anymore. He was offering something truer, a commitment to stay. The days that followed unfolded not in grand gestures, but in small, deliberate acts. Elon, Alexis, and Sophie began tending to the property together. There were fences to mend, weeds to pull, broken gates to oil back into movement. The work was sometimes clumsy, sometimes frustrating, but always shared. Sophie planted a patch of native wildflowers near the edge of the vineyard. She named the tallest sapling after Helen, carefully watering its roots every morning, as though she understood in her own quiet way that this was a kind of remembering. Alexis surprised Elon by inviting friends from school to visit. They picnicked beneath the oaks, played old records on a battered turntable they found in the attic and filled the house with the sound of something Elon hadn't realized he'd missed: youthful joy, alive and present. The vineyard was no longer a monument. It was a home. Elon often worked alongside Alexis in silence, mending the creaking swing set near the back porch or sweeping the loose leaves that gathered around the barn. They spoke, not in long monologues, but in brief exchanges, comments about the weather, questions about the soil, the occasional quiet joke that coaxed a soft smile from Alexis. The bond between them, once frayed and strained, was now woven through shared routines, quiet afternoons, and the simple decision to stay. Sophie, ever the observer, learned quickly. She knelt by the vines, brushing her fingers over the leaves, asking questions about the growing seasons, the roots, the patience required to tend a vineyard. Elon realized that in her childlike wonder, she was learning something he had spent years overlooking: the slow rhythm of the land, the beauty of things that take time. On a quiet evening, Elon sat alone at the kitchen table, a sheet of paper before him. The house was still, the girls asleep upstairs. He began to write to Helen one last letter. The words came gently, without the weight of anger, without the urgency of unfinished questions. I used to think grief was a wall I had to climb over, something to outpace. But I was wrong. It's not a wall, it's a door. I've stepped through it now. And on the other side, I've found pieces of you I never knew how to hold. You've never really left us. You're here, in the way Sophie tends to her flowers, in the way Alexis smiles when she thinks I'm not looking. You're here, not in what's missing, but in what remains. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully and walked outside, the cool night air brushing his face. Beneath the same oak where his great-grandfather's initials were carved, he set the letter alight. The flames crackled softly, the edges curling into amber as the words rose with the smoke into the darkening sky. He didn't burn the letter to forget. He burned it to carry the memory in a different way, not on paper, but in the quiet corners of his life, in the space he now made for Helen to simply be part of their story. As the embers cooled, Elon turned and found Alexis and Sophie waiting for him by the vineyard path, their silhouettes framed by the last light of sunset. Without speaking, they began to walk, three quiet figures moving side by side, their steps steady, their hearts lighter. The land was no longer just soil or inheritance. It was where they would plant, where they would grow, where they would remember. For the first time, Elon felt no pull to leave, no restless ache to chase something beyond the horizon. He had found something far rarer than the next ambition. He had found a place to stay. The days began to take on a new shape in Sonoma. Elon Musk, for the first time in years, attempted to build a routine that wasn't measured by flight schedules or corporate milestones, but by the quiet rhythms of home. The vineyard became not just a backdrop, but the heartbeat of their days. The house no longer felt hollow. The silence, once sharp and cavernous, now settled like soft music between the rooms. There were echoes, yes. Helen's laughter in the creak of the stairs, her favorite songs lingering faintly when the breeze passed through an open window, but they no longer wounded him. The memories had softened, woven into the fabric of their new life. Some nights, Sophie would tiptoe into Elon's room, her small frame hesitating at the doorway. "Can I sleep here tonight?" Elon would lift the covers without question, offering a space beside him where Sophie would curl up, her head resting against his arm, her breath warm and steady. He no longer pushed her to sleep alone. He understood now that grief moves in small steps and comfort comes in quiet permissions. Alexis, too, lingered more often. There was no grand apology, no formal reconciliation, just a slow accumulation of ordinary moments. She helped Elon mend a broken latch on the barn door, showed him how to find the best coffee in town, and occasionally joined him in the kitchen, their conversations meandering from practical tasks to stories about Helen. They visited parks and quiet plazas in the surrounding towns, places they had all overlooked when life was faster. Sophie marveled at the painted tiles of the town squares, collected smooth stones from riverbanks, and named each one as if they were old friends. Elon began to notice the shifting colors of the vineyards at different times of day, the way the soil warmed his bare feet in the afternoon and cooled at dusk. Beauty had been there all along. He had simply been moving too quickly to see it. On weekends, they visited Helen's parents more frequently. The grandparents, once distant presences in Elon's life, now became steady figures at their table. Sophie would sit on her grandmother's lap as she braided her hair, while Alexis quietly shared tea and long, wandering conversations with her grandfather. These visits anchored them, threads reaching across generations, pulling them closer. Yet, the choice to keep the vineyard still rippled outward. Some cousins continued to press, their discontent now expressed in thinly veiled remarks at family gatherings or in curt phone calls. "You've tied up the family's future in sentimental knots," one cousin accused. "You're letting emotion lead where reason should." Elon no longer bristled. He answered calmly, his voice steady. "Not all returns are measured in profit. This is where we build our life now. That's reason enough for me." He began sorting through decades of paperwork, the endless deeds, maps, and contracts that governed the vineyard's past. Alexis surprised him by offering to help. They spent quiet evenings side by side at the kitchen table, Alexis cross-legged, flipping through faded files, while Elon carefully cataloged each document. It was a quiet labor, but brought them closer, their hands tracing the legacy they now chose to carry together. One morning, as the mist clung low over the vines, Sophie approached Elon in the garden, her small face lit with determination. "Can we plant a tree? Right here, so it can grow with us." Elon knelt beside her, brushing a fallen leaf from her hair. "Of course. What kind of tree?" "A peach tree," she decided quickly, her smile widening. "So we can eat peaches in summer." The planting became a quiet ceremony. Elon dug the hole, Alexis helped position the sapling, and Sophie gently packed the soil around the roots with her bare hands. There was something sacred in their careful movements, in the way they worked without rush, giving the moment its full weight. When the last shovelful of earth settled, they stood back, their hands dirt-streaked, but their hearts quietly full. "This is our tree now," Sophie declared, brushing her palms against her dress. "It belongs to us." Elon looked at his daughters, their bond growing not through grand declarations, but through shared soil, shared days, shared breath. The vineyard no longer felt like a question. It had become the answer. Life resumed its gentle pace. Mornings filled with Sophie's questions about the vines and Alexis's soft humming as she wandered through the kitchen. Evenings brought quiet dinners, simple conversations, sometimes a shared movie where they would end up under the same blanket, the closeness no longer unfamiliar. There was no perfect rhythm. There were still moments of sadness, still pauses where Helen's absence touched them unexpectedly. But they no longer feared those moments. They allowed space for them. Elon began to understand that they were not rebuilding what they had lost. They were building something entirely new, something imperfect but whole in its own way. One afternoon, as the sky turned amber, Elon found himself standing near the young peach tree, its slender branches trembling gently in the breeze. He pressed his palm against the fragile trunk, feeling its quiet, determined pulse. He thought of Helen, not as a distant ache, but as a presence folded into their everyday life. He had once believed that moving forward meant leaving things behind. But now he understood, moving forward sometimes means carrying the echoes with you, letting them shape the road ahead. As Alexis called to Sophie from the porch, their laughter rising again across the vineyard, Elon smiled, a quiet, lasting smile. The land they had chosen to keep had, in turn, chosen to keep them. The first time Elon Musk attempted to cook for his daughters, the kitchen was filled with more smoke than success. He had followed the instructions carefully, at least he thought he had, but somehow the pancakes came out lopsided and stubbornly pale in the middle. "Dad, these are a little raw," Alexis commented, trying to bite through one with theatrical difficulty. Sophie, always the optimist, simply drowned hers in syrup and grinned. "It's okay. They're special pancakes." Elon laughed, shaking his head. "I'll get better at this. I promise." And he did, or at least he tried. The meals remained imperfect, burnt edges, too much salt, forgotten ingredients, but the table became a new kind of gathering place. They lingered over breakfast longer than necessary, swapped stories over simple dinners, and filled the once quiet kitchen with the kind of laughter that only comes when people finally feel safe together. Sophie soon appointed herself the house's technology guide. Despite Elon's towering reputation as a tech visionary, he had somehow managed to avoid the everyday apps his daughters used with ease. "Dad, you don't even know how to send stickers," Sophie teased one afternoon as they sat side by side on the couch, her small fingers guiding his across the screen. "Do I need to know how to send stickers?" he asked, half amused. "Yes, it's important," she insisted, her eyes sparkling with authority. She showed him how to edit photos, use playful filters, and send animated messages. The technology was simple, but the connection it built between them was profound. Alexis, watching from across the room, eventually joined in, sharing her music with him. She introduced him to her playlists, a strange but fascinating mix of modern bands and obscure indie artists. One evening, as they folded laundry together, she played a song that had been her mother's favorite, a quiet, haunting melody that drifted through the house. "She used to play this on repeat," Alexis murmured, her voice soft. Elon paused, the fabric slipping through his fingers. "I never noticed." Alexis glanced at him, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "You notice things now." Their conversations, once guarded, gradually unfolded. They debated movies, old classics Elon loved and new releases Alexis defended with passion. Family movie nights became rituals, complete with popcorn and lively discussions about which characters made the right choices and which didn't. On weekends, Elon reconnected with old friends from his childhood, men he hadn't seen in years, who still lived along the Sonoma coastline. They welcomed him back without ceremony, their friendships resuming with the comfortable ease of people who had once climbed trees and raced bicycles together. Elon took Alexis and Sophie to the coast, sharing his favorite hidden coves and the secret cliffside trails only the locals knew. The ocean, once distant, became part of their new rhythm. Sophie, flourishing in her new routine, began making friends more easily at school. Her teachers noticed she smiled more, that she raised her hand with curiosity instead of hesitation. Her drawings, once filled with quiet, solitary scenes, now burst with color and groups of laughing figures. Alexis discovered photography almost by accident. One afternoon, while wandering through the vineyard with an old camera they found tucked away in storage, she began capturing the world around her, the shifting shadows, Sophie's carefree sprints, Elon's quiet moments tending the garden. The camera became her way of making sense of what they were building together. She printed the photos and taped them across her bedroom wall, slowly stitching together a visual map of their new life. Elon noticed her growing passion and, for the first time, truly supported her interests. He asked about her compositions, helped her find photography books, and even accompanied her to nearby towns for weekend shoots. In his newfound role as a present father, Elon became a regular at Sophie's school events. He sat in the front row at her class performances, attended parent-teacher meetings, and learned to appreciate the quiet pride in simply being there. Perhaps the most challenging lesson came when Elon realized he didn't always need to solve things. He began to listen without rushing to fix. When Alexis vented about school, about friends, about the things that felt heavy to her, Elon simply sat with her, letting her words unfold without offering tidy solutions. "You don't have to fix me, Dad," she said once, her voice a blend of frustration and affection. "I know," he said, and he meant it. Sid, a friend from Alexis's school, started visiting their home regularly. He was kind, thoughtful, and surprisingly patient with Sophie's endless questions. Elon observed their friendship cautiously at first, but soon he welcomed Sid's presence. The boy helped Sophie build a birdhouse in the backyard and often joined their movie nights, fitting naturally into the quiet rhythm of their family. Their backyard, once neglected, slowly transformed into a creative sanctuary. Together, they planted herbs and flowers, painted old wooden crates, and built small benches beneath the trees. Sophie strung fairy lights across the fence with Sid's help, and Alexis painted a mural on the back wall, a vibrant scene of the vineyard, the ocean, and small family beneath a peach tree. Elon found himself enjoying the smallest tasks, watering the garden at dawn, repairing loose hinges, hammering nails into wooden boards with Sophie by his side. Joy no longer came from grand designs, but from the weight of a watering can, from the sound of his daughters laughing nearby. The house, once sterile and quiet, had come alive. Its walls held the echoes of music, of stories told over dinner, of shared silence that now felt safe. It wasn't a perfect life. There were still moments of sadness, of memories that arrived without warning. But now they met those moments together, not as scattered individuals, but as a family steadily rebuilding itself. In the end, the greatest lesson Elon learned was not about technology or ambition. It was about the gentleness required to stay, to listen, to build slowly, one imperfect day at a time. The house, once just a structure, now breathed with human warmth, a home that belonged to all three of them. The rain fell in a soft, steady rhythm as Elon Musk stepped onto the winding path of the local park. Sonoma wore the morning mist like a quiet shawl, the trees glistening with fresh drops, the air rich with the scent of wet earth. He had come alone, as he often did now, to visit Helen's memorial, a small stone tucked beneath a wide oak that she used to love. He sat on the bench nearby, pulling his jacket a little closer against the drizzle, and looked at the simple plaque engraved with her name. There was no grand speech in him, no need for ceremony. Instead, he spoke to her as if they were still sharing breakfast, as if she might answer. "Elena started playing guitar," he said softly, using the pet name that had been theirs once. "It's rough, but she's getting better. Sophie adores it. I think Alexis plays mostly for her." He paused, letting the silence sit comfortably between them. "I've been trying," he admitted, his voice low. "I never really knew how to be present, but I'm learning. They're teaching me, actually." He told her about Sophie's birdhouse, about the tree they planted together, about Alexis's growing passion for photography. He didn't hide his missteps, his clumsy cooking, his quiet fears. It was an honest conversation, shaped not by guilt, but by a growing peace. "I still wish you were here to see it," he murmured, his throat tightening. "I wish I'd got more time to grow old with you." His eyes drifted to an elderly couple walking slowly along the path, their hands intertwined, their steps perfectly in sync. A pang rose in his chest, not jealousy, but a gentle ache for what could have been. Elon sat there until the rain softened to mist, then rose, pressing his palm lightly against the cold surface of the stone. "See you soon," he whispered. When he returned home, he found Alexis in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the couch, cradling an old guitar. Sophie was perched beside her, eyes wide, swaying slightly to the soft, imperfect melody. The scene stilled him. There was something so tender in the simplicity of it. No grand gestures, just music filling the quiet spaces of their home. Elon didn't speak. He simply joined them, settling into his usual spot as the song carried on, Sophie's head resting against Alexis's shoulder. Later, the three of them curled beneath a shared blanket, half watching a movie, half lost in their own quiet thoughts. The television flickered, but it was the silence between them that meant the most. It was here, in these quiet hours, that Elon understood something he had missed all his life. Life isn't stitched together in grand victories or bold declarations. It's built in these small silences, in the shared warmth, the soft glances, the peaceful breaths. As the credits rolled, Alexis turned to him. "What if, next summer, we take a real trip? Just the three of us. Somewhere new." Elon looked at her, surprised by the suggestion, but warmed by it. "I'd like that," he said, and he meant it. The following morning, Sophie slipped a folded piece of paper into his hand. Written in careful, uneven letters were the words, "You are a good dad now." Elon's throat closed around the quiet weight of it. He carefully tucked the note into his wallet, pressing his thumb against the soft paper as if to etch the words into his skin. The call came later that day, a cousin reaching out about the vineyard. We'd like to talk again. Maybe work something out. Elon listened, respectful but firm. I'm always open to conversation, he said, but I need you to understand. The vineyard isn't for sale anymore. Not now. Not ever. He no longer felt defensive. He wasn't protecting an asset. He was protecting a home, a story, a life finally being written with care. In the afternoon, Sophie tugged at his sleeve. Dad, can we build a swing in the backyard? Elon smiled, already envisioning the project. Of course we can. The days settled into a rhythm both new and deeply satisfying. School drop-offs, afternoon gardening, shared meals, and the small but steady rituals of a life lived fully, if imperfectly. Evenings were reserved for family, blankets tangled on the couch, long debates about which movie to watch, Sophie's delighted squeals when her father picked the wrong answer in a board game. The house that once echoed with absence now pulsed with gentle life. There were still moments when the memory of Helen pressed against him. A familiar song, the scent of her favorite tea, a flash of sunlight that fell across the table in just the right way. But the memories no longer consumed him. They settled beside him, quietly folded into the days, woven into the life he was finally allowing himself to build. Alexis laughed more easily now, her shoulders less tense, her guardedness giving way to something lighter. Sophie's drawings began to fill the walls, not just with scenes of the vineyard, but with smiling families, big oak trees, and the swing they would soon finish together. Elon found himself waking each morning not with a list of objectives, but with a quiet gratitude for the day itself, for the chance to drive Sophie to school, to ask Alexis about her photography, to share coffee in the kitchen, while the house still held the soft chill of dawn. For the first time, he wasn't racing towards something. He was simply here. He had thought peace was something he would have to earn, to achieve through work or conquest. But now he understood it was something he had to allow, something that grew in the simple act of staying, of listening, of choosing to be present in the smallest hours. In those quiet hours, life had returned. It wasn't grand, it wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. It was Alexis who suggested it first. "Let's go back to the vineyard," she said one afternoon, her voice light, without the usual weight of necessity or argument. Not to fix anything. Not because we have to, just because we want to. Elon looked up from the papers on the kitchen table, surprised by the simplicity of the request. For so long, their visits to the property had been driven by decisions, by tasks, by the pressing need to confront something. But now, Alexis was inviting him to return without an agenda, just to be there. Sophie, overhearing from a hallway, burst into the room, her face alight with excitement. "Can we go? Please? I want to pick more stones. I want to bring more of the vineyard home in my pockets." Elon smiled, the answer already settled in his heart. Yes, let's go. There was no rush, no carefully timed itinerary. They packed lightly, bringing only what they needed for a simple weekend, their focus not on schedules, but on being present. As they drove toward Sonoma, the familiar curves of the road no longer felt like thresholds of uncertainty. The vineyard was no longer a battleground or a burden. It had become a place where they belonged. When they arrived, the landscape welcomed them like an old friend. The vines stretched lazily under the afternoon sun, the oak trees whispered in the soft breeze, and the earth felt warm beneath their feet. This time, there were no cousins, no legal documents, no unresolved confrontations. Just the three of them, a father and his daughters, walking the land that was now undeniably theirs. They wandered through the familiar paths, their steps unhurried. Sophie darted ahead, gathering leaves and smooth stones, her small hands cradling each one as if it were a treasure. "I want to take these home," she declared proudly. "I want to carry the land with me. I want to keep it in my pockets." Elon chuckled, his chest tightening with affection. "Careful, if you take too much, the vineyard might follow you home." Sophie giggled, stuffing another perfect stone into her jacket pocket. Alexis walked more slowly, her camera always in hand. She paused often, angling the lens toward shadows, sunlight on leaves, the gentle curve of the hills. She photographed not to document, but to collect, to hold onto the quiet beauty she had once ignored. "These are for me," she said when Elon asked what she planned to do with the photos. "For later, for when I want to remember what this feels like." There was a softness to her now, a loosening of the guarded edges that had once defined her. Near the edge of the vineyard, Elon stopped and pointed to a bare patch of soil. "Let's plant a tree here," he said, the idea forming in the moment, but feeling exactly right. Together, they dug into the earth, their hands working side by side. Sophie patted the soil around the sapling with determined care. Alexis paused to take a photo of their muddy hands, of the freshly planted tree, of her sister's satisfied smile. "This is our tree," Elon said, his voice steady. "One day, maybe you'll bring your children here to see it." The idea settled around them quietly, like sunlight filtering through leaves. As they sat on the grass nearby, their backs warmed by the late sun, Elon began to speak about the people who had come before them, his grandfather, his great-grandmother, stories buried beneath the roots of the vineyard. "We're part of something bigger," he told them. "When we take care of this land, we're taking care of their stories too." Alexis looked at him, thoughtful. "Do you still miss Mom?" Elon took a long breath, the question neither painful nor unexpected. "I do," he said, "but it doesn't stop me anymore. It doesn't keep me from moving forward." Alexis nodded, as if she understood that grief could coexist with growth, that remembering someone didn't mean staying in one place. As the day began to fold into evening, the three of them sat in silence, watching the sun dip behind the distant hills. The sky burned in quiet colors, soft oranges fading pinks, the cool promise of blue. Elon realized then that his mission had shifted. It was no longer about protecting what had been lost. It was about safeguarding what was growing. Alexis's laughter, Sophie's curiosity, the fragile sapling now rooted in their care. The past would always walk with them, but it was the present they were building that now asked for his attention, his steadiness. When they returned home, Sophie proudly unpacked her collection of stones and leaves, lining them along the windowsill as if curating a small, personal museum of the vineyard. "This way, the vineyard is always with us," she said, satisfied. Alexis developed her photos, pinning them on her bedroom wall, crafting a visual map of memories she had once feared would fade. Elon slipped a small, smooth stone into his jacket pocket, feeling the gentle weight of it as he walked through the house. The vineyard was no longer just a place they visited. It had settled into them. It traveled with them now, in pockets, in photographs, in the gentle rhythm of their days. Their bond, once tentative and burdened by what was gone, had deepened, not through grand reconciliations, but through shared silence, through simple rituals, through the steady work of choosing each other, again and again. It was no longer about carrying the past. It was about building a present worth inheriting. The letter arrived on a quiet Thursday morning, its edges soft, its handwriting unmistakably familiar. Elon Musk turned it over in his hands, his pulse quickening as he read the return address. Samuel Hart, his cousin, the one who had once raced him barefoot across the vineyard paths, the one who had disappeared into adulthood with a swiftness Elon had never questioned. He broke the seal carefully, unfolding the paper with a reverence he hadn't expected to feel. "Elon," the letter began, "it's been a long time since we were boys with scraped knees and dirt-streaked shirts. But I've been watching from a distance, quietly, respectfully, as you made the choice none of us had the courage to make. You heard what the land was trying to tell us. You listened." Elon sat down at the kitchen table, his thumb tracing the loops and careful slants of Samuel's handwriting. His cousin's words wove through stories of their childhood, sun-soaked afternoons spent climbing trees, the secret trails they'd sworn to keep from the adults, the grape juice stains that had ruined more than one pair of shoes. "I argued for selling because I thought that was what we were supposed to do. That's what the world teaches us. Move on, let go, make the profitable choice. But you didn't. You stayed. You listened. You remembered. And because you did, the rest of us get to remember too." Elon read the letter once, then again, then folded it and opened it a third time, his eyes pausing at the line, that struck deepest. You were the only one of us who heard what the earth was saying. For all the weight of the last months, for all the uncertainty and grief, this was the first time Elon felt understood. Not as a businessman, not as a father struggling to repair his family, but as someone who had chosen to stay rooted. He sat in quiet reflection until Alexis drifted into the room, her hair still mussed from sleep, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "What's that?" she asked, nodding toward the letter. Elon slid it across the table, wordlessly offering it to her. Alexis read slowly, her gaze steady, her expression unreadable at first. When she finished, she looked up at him, something soft flickering in her deep hazel eyes. "Seems like he gets it," she said. Elon nodded. "Yeah, I think he does." They sat in the shared silence, a fragile bridge forming, not just between father and daughter, but between generations, between the past they had inherited and the future they were now choosing to build. Sophie soon padded into the kitchen, her curls still damp from her morning shower, curiosity lighting her face. "Was the letter about our trees?" she asked. Elon smiled, folding the paper carefully. "It was, and about us too." Later that day, the three of them visited Helen's memorial, each carrying something small but meaningful. Sophie brought fresh wildflowers she'd picked from a garden, her tiny fist clutching the delicate stems. Elon carried a pebble Sophie had insisted on bringing from a vineyard, a token, she said, that should stay near Helen. And Alexis brought one of her photographs, a simple, quiet image of the vineyard at sunrise, the new sapling casting a thin, hopeful shadow. Without words, Alexis gently tucked the photograph at the base of the stone, adding it to the layers of memory that had gathered there. Elon knelt beside the memorial, his fingers brushing the petals of Sophie's flowers, his gaze resting on the photo. It felt like adding something alive to what had once been frozen in grief. That evening, moved by something he couldn't yet name, Elon found himself drawn to the quiet space of his study. For years, his journals had been spreadsheets, his records crisp and impersonal. But now, for the first time, he opened a fresh notebook and began to write. Not about rockets or quarterly reports, but about his daughters, about the fragile beauty of their ordinary days. He wrote about Alexis's quiet way of seeing the world, the slight tilt of her head when she photographed sunlight falling across the vineyard fence. He wrote about Sophie's laughter, her insistence on collecting pocket treasures, and the way she always, without fail, asked the questions that mattered. He wrote about Helen, about loss, about how grief had changed from something sharp to something woven gently through his mornings. The diary became a space where Elon could finally hear his own voice, not the one shaped by expectation, but the one softened by time, by love, by the deliberate act of staying. One afternoon, Sophie approached him, her hazel eyes wide with earnest excitement. "Daddy," she said, tugging at his sleeve, "can you teach me to swim better? I want to float without sinking." Elon smiled, closing his notebook. "Of course. Let's go now." They spent the afternoon at the local pool, Sophie's shrieks of joy echoing across the water as Elon steadied her small frame, his hands gently guiding her through each kick, each breath. "Like this, Daddy?" she called, paddling eagerly. "Exactly like that," he laughed, the sound surprising him with its ease. Each moment in the water became another thread woven into their new life, simple, joyful, and fully his. He was no longer the man standing on the sidelines of his own family story. He was in it, fully immersed, finally building a home he had never known how to build. In the quiet evenings that followed, Elon continued to write, his words growing steadily, like vines reclaiming old walls. He no longer chased the grand arc of legacy. He found meaning in the daily rituals, the garden Sophie watered religiously, the photographs Alexis carefully cataloged, the warm weight of his daughters leaning into him as they shared another movie on the couch. What once felt like scattered pieces had begun to fit, slowly and imperfectly, into something whole. He was not just preserving the land. He was planting something entirely new. The letter arrived on a morning much like any other, a crisp envelope, a familiar corporate seal pressed into the flap. Another offer, another number. But this one was different. This one was astronomical, the kind of offer most people would never think twice about accepting. Elon Musk unfolded the letter slowly, his eyes sweeping across the carefully typed figures and polished language, each sentence more persuasive than the last. An offer to buy the vineyard, to buy the land that had shaped his family's recent story, to buy their roots. For a brief moment, he let the magnitude of the proposal linger in his mind. But this time, there was no pull, no temptation, no hesitation. Without a second thought, he folded the letter neatly, slid it into a drawer, and closed it. It was not for sale. Not now. Not ever. When he told Alexis about the offer later that day, she looked at him with quiet admiration, her deep hazel eyes softening. Some things, she said simply, aren't supposed to have a price. He smiled. Some wealth can't be measured. Exactly, she replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Some wealth is what you build, not what you sell. Even Sophie, who didn't fully understand the weight of the decision, instinctively knew its importance. That afternoon, she drew a picture of their vineyard, green rows beneath a bright blue sky, their small family beneath the peach tree they had planted together. She pinned it to the refrigerator, where it stayed, a quiet declaration of what home meant to her. Instead of selling, Elon chose to open the land to family in a different way. He began organizing small, informal gatherings at the property, simple meals, afternoon walks, games for the children. No contracts, no negotiations, just shared time. At first, only a few cousins came, cautious, perhaps curious. But as the seasons changed, the gatherings grew. The same cousins who once urged him to sell began to help him care for the place. They cleared old trails, pruned overgrown branches, painted the weathered fences. The property transformed, not through hired crews, but through hands that carried shared memories. There were long wooden tables placed beneath the oak trees, meals served in mismatched dishes, laughter rising in the open air. It wasn't grand, it wasn't curated, but it was theirs. For the first time, Elon felt what he hadn't realized he'd been searching for all along, a sense of true belonging, untethered from achievement, from acquisition, from expectation. Alexis documented the gatherings with her camera, carefully framing moments of connection. A cousin helping Sophie identify wildflowers, friends repairing a broken bench, Elon smiling in unguarded stillness. She compiled the photos into an album, its pages slowly filling with snapshots of this quiet, shared life. "These are the moments that matter," she said, showing her father the nearly finished album one evening. "These are the ones we'll remember." Sophie, now as comfortable among the vineyard's winding paths as in her own room, began learning the names of the plants and birds that filled the land. She would dash toward Elon, excitement sparkling in her hazel eyes. "Dad, that's a western bluebird. And these are blackberries, but we can't pick them yet. They're not ready." Each discovery, each small lesson, deepened her sense of place, her connection to the soil beneath her feet. The trio spent more time outdoors, not out of obligation, but out of genuine joy. They tended the garden together, rebuilt an old swing that creaked in the breeze, and often sat beneath the peach tree in the cool of the afternoon, sharing stories, sharing silence. Elon wrote about these days in his journal. His entries, once sparse and hesitant, now flowed freely. "Wealth," he penned one evening, "is not what you sell. It's what you care for. It's what you choose to protect, to nourish, to grow with your own hands. It's the roots you decide to keep." His daughters no longer asked about selling the land. Contracts and offers had lost their weight. Their attention had shifted to the soil, to the meals shared beneath the trees, to the rhythms of seasons and family. The distance that had once stretched between them, between father and daughters, between cousins and childhood friends, had narrowed. What once seemed fragmented had quietly begun to blossom into something whole. The routines they built, morning walks through the dew-covered vineyard, evenings tending to the garden, shared laughter over imperfect dinners, became the foundation of their new life. In these small, deliberate acts, they found something Elon had never encountered in the halls of business or on the covers of magazines, a wealth that could not be bought or sold. A wealth that did not shrink when shared, but only grew. Some days, Elon would find Sophie sitting under the peach tree, carefully sketching new pictures of the land. On others, he'd see Alexis photographing the way sunlight filtered through the leaves, capturing the same scenes over and over with quiet reverence. And sometimes as he sat with his daughters, watching Sophie chase butterflies, watching Alexis frame a shot, he would simply breathe and allow himself to stay still, fully present in the moment they had built together. What he once viewed as an inheritance, he now understood as a responsibility, a living, breathing story that would continue through the hands and hearts of those who chose to remain. They had found their roots not in documents, but in shared days, in soft laughter, in soil pressed carefully around young trees. And that was wealth beyond any price. The box was tucked behind old linens in the back of a forgotten closet. Dust clung to its corners, and the marker that once labeled it had faded to a faint, indecipherable smudge. Elon Musk hadn't been looking for it. He had been searching for something else entirely, a misplaced screwdriver, perhaps, but life has a way of placing the right things in our path when we least expect them. He pulled the box into the light, the cardboard soft from years of being overlooked. As he lifted the lid, the faint scent of old paper and time drifted up to meet him. Inside were scattered home videos, tapes and small digital files on outdated devices, snapshots of a life he had never thought to revisit. Curious and unsettled, Elon gathered the box and brought it to the living room where Alexis and Sophie were sprawled on the floor, sorting through art supplies and schoolwork. "I found something," he said simply. They spent the afternoon exploring the contents, setting up the old player, adjusting wires, pressing buttons that still, somehow, responded. The screen flickered to life, grainy at first, but gradually resolving into color. There they were, themselves years younger. Sophie as a toddler, wobbling across the vineyard paths. Alexis with wind-tangled hair, chasing bubbles across the backyard. Helen's voice filled the room, warm and unmistakable, her laughter spilling into the corners of the house like sunlight. Elon's heart contracted as he heard it, the sound he had unknowingly missed so deeply. Helen's laugh was not distant on the tape. It was present. It was here. They watched the recordings without speaking at first, each of them swimming through their own tides of memory. There were birthdays, beach trips, quiet mornings at the kitchen table. Helen's hands brushing through Alexis's hair, Helen lifting Sophie into her arms, Helen glancing toward the camera, toward Elon, with a smile that now felt both tender and shattering. Alexis broke the silence first. "You were lighter. You smiled more back then." Elon's gaze didn't leave the screen. He saw it too. His younger self, fully there in body, but somehow absent in spirit. A man who moved, who recorded, but who hadn't truly been present. "I was there," he admitted quietly, "but not really. Not in the way that mattered." Sophie shifted closer to him, her small arms wrapping tightly around his waist. "But you're here now, and that's what matters to me." His hand gently settled on her shoulder, steadying himself against the wave of emotion that rose in his chest. They spent hours watching the footage, laughing at the girl's childhood mischief, at his own awkward attempts at singing lullabies, at the messy, beautiful life that had passed too quickly. When a last tape played to its end, they carefully sorted the recordings into boxes, labeling them in Alexis's neat handwriting for rainy days, for remembering, for keeping close. It wasn't a formal archiving. It was an act of love, a promise that the past would remain within reach, not as something to chase or to regret, but as something to honor. Elon realized, as he sat amidst the scattered tapes and labels, that perfection had never been what his family needed. What they had always needed, what he had failed to give, was presence. Real, simple presence. Alexis echoed the same truth as she carefully added a new page to her growing album, writing in her deliberate script. Memories don't have to be perfect. They just have to be ours. The days moved forward with a new kind of rhythm, one that no longer rushed. They continued to visit the vineyard, but the urgency that once haunted those trips had dissipated. Now they strolled without purpose, picnicked without time limits, simply existing in the space they had chosen to protect. Elon stopped thinking of the property as an inheritance to preserve or a legacy to guard. It had become a living, breathing place of belonging, not for what it could someday be, but for what was right now. The wealth they had found wasn't in contracts or negotiations. It was in sun-dappled afternoons, in the way Sophie's small hand slipped easily into his, in Alexis's quiet, growing smile when she captured another photo of their ordinary, extraordinary life. Elon found himself at Sophie's school more often. Small assemblies, art fairs, a science project that proudly leaned too far to one side but still stood. He sat in the front row, clapping, watching her search for his face in the crowd, always beaming when she found him. One evening, after another simple, laughter-filled dinner, Sophie handed him a folded piece of paper. "It's for you," she said, her eyes sparkling. Inside was a drawing, a simple crayon sketch of the three of them standing hand in front of the vineyard, the peach tree carefully placed in the background. "That's us," Sophie said proudly. "This is our place." Elon pressed the drawing against his chest, his throat tight, his heart full. Later, he tucked the drawing into his journal, right beside the letter from his cousin Samuel, the two quietly becoming his most cherished keepsakes, not of the past, but of the life they were now actively building. He wrote in his journal that night, anchored in memory, but moving forward together. That's what home feels like now. The fragments of their old life had not disappeared. They had not been overwritten. They had simply been gathered carefully into something whole, something that belonged to all three of them. In the gentle weight of Sophie's hand, in the quiet glance Alexis now shared with him, in the soft presence of the vineyard soil beneath their feet, Elon finally understood. Some memories are not there to be perfected. They are there to be lived, to be held, to be enough. It began quietly, as most important things do. Months had passed since Elon, Alexis, and Sophie had planted the small sapling on the family property. For a long time, it stood as little more than a slender promise, its bare branches delicate, its future uncertain. But one morning, as the first blush of dawn stretched over Sonoma, Elon walked the familiar path to the vineyard and saw it, a single blossom, soft, pale, and unassuming, gracefully unfurling. The tree was blooming. It wasn't sudden. It was the patient work of roots growing deep, of time spent waiting, of quiet care. Elon stood there for a long while, the watering can dangling from his hand, watching the soft petals tremble in the cool morning breeze. There was no grand announcement, no need for celebration. The bloom itself was enough. Each morning, he returned not out of duty, but out of genuine affection. He watered the tree at dawn, feeling the steady rhythm of its growth, as if nature had decided to slow him down, to teach him a different kind of time. Back at home, life unfolded in its own gentle patterns. The house that once echoed with silence now pulsed with warmth. Books lined the shelves. Family photos filled the walls. Alexis's carefully assembled photo album, now thick with pages, rested open on the living room table. The images no longer clung to the weight of the past. There were snapshots of muddy shoes, backyard picnics, quiet mornings over pancakes. Sophie's wild curls caught in the wind. Elon's unguarded smiles. There was space for imperfection. There was joy without condition. Sophie had created a world of her own in the backyard, a small, flourishing garden where each plant bore a carefully chosen name. She spoke to them as she watered, as if each leaf carried secrets. The lavender was named Violet. The rosemary was Rosie. The small peach tree, her favorite, she named Hope. Plants like to be known, she explained one evening, her hazel eyes wide with conviction. If you know their names, they grow better. Elon smiled, leaning down to inspect the tiny buds with her. Is that so? She nodded with authority. Names are like hugs. They help things grow. Their home, once stark and impersonal, now overflowed with quiet life. A worn, inviting armchair sat in the corner by the window. paintings Sophie had made at school filled the kitchen walls. There were fresh flowers in vases, the faint smell of baked bread, and the sound of music drifting softly through the rooms. They built things together now, not out of necessity, but out of joy. On one of their weekend visits to the vineyard, they decided to build a bench. Not a grand project, just something simple and solid, a place to sit, to rest, to return to. They worked side by side, sanding the wood, driving nails, brushing the final coat of sealant. Sophie insisted they carve something into the backrest. "Something for us," she said. Together, they chose the words. For what remains. It wasn't just a bench. It became their place, a quiet endpoint to each visit where they would sit together and let the wind braid itself through their silence. Sometimes they would talk. Sometimes they wouldn't. It didn't matter. What mattered was that they were there, fully, without hurry. Alexis, now more open, more present, often lingered on the bench after Sophie darted off to explore the trails. She and Elon would talk, not as father and daughter bound by roles, but as two people who had found, slowly, the rhythm of true conversation. She spoke of her future, of her dreams to travel, of the fear and thrill of stepping into the unknown. Elon listened, not with the reflex to advise or fix, but simply to hear her. He marveled at the woman she was becoming, resilient, thoughtful, still carrying her fierce edge, but with a softness he had almost missed. One afternoon, as they sat on the bench watching Sophie chase butterflies near the peach tree, Alexis asked, "Do you think Mom still sees us?" Elon considered the question, looking out across the land they had fought to keep. "I do," he said, his voice steady. "I think she sees us in the way we care for each other, in how we show up, in the things we choose to keep." Alexis smiled, her gaze distant but peaceful. "Yeah, I think so too." Time passed, but they no longer rushed. The urgency that once chased them had been replaced with quiet steadiness. Days were full but not frantic. Tasks were completed, but never at the expense of shared moments. The vineyard no longer whispered of obligations. It simply welcomed them. The family story, once fragmented and brittle, now moved with a new cadence, slow, deliberate, stitched together by small routines, by laughter, by the act of showing up for each other. Each visit, the tree bloomed a little more. New buds appeared, petals scattered in the wind. The branches grew stronger. Sophie often ran ahead, calling out to her father and sister from the base of the tree. "Look, more flowers." Elon would walk toward her, feeling the weight of his journal tucked safely in his pocket, the same journal that now held Sophie's drawing and Samuel's letter side by side, like quiet keepsakes anchoring him to what mattered. Some mornings, when the wind moved through the leaves just right, Elon imagined he could hear a voice there, a soft echo of Helen's laughter, folded into the rustle of the branches, into the whisper of petals falling to the ground. But he didn't chase the sound. He stayed with what was in front of him. The slow bloom, the quiet moments, the imperfect, steady beauty of what they were building now. In the end, that was what remained, and it was enough. The day arrived soft and bright, with the kind of golden morning light that seemed to promise something lasting. Elon, Alexis, and Sophie had spent the week preparing, packing baskets, laying out blankets, and tidying the familiar paths that wove through their family's vineyard. This time, it was not just for them. They had invited cousins, friends, and neighbors, people who had once drifted to the edges of their lives, now returning to build something new alongside them. It would be their first shared picnic on the land, a gathering not to mark an occasion, but simply to celebrate what they had grown together. The meadow near the old oak tree was soon filled with soft voices and easy laughter. Children ran barefoot over the grass, their shrieks of joy rising like songbirds. The long wooden tables, placed beneath the steady shade, overflowed with homemade dishes and fresh fruit. There was no ceremony, no speeches, just the gentle hum of a family rediscovering itself. Elon moved among the guests, feeling a quiet warmth as familiar faces greeted him, not as the distant figure they once knew, but as a man who had chosen to stay, to root himself here. He shared stories with cousins who, after months of silence and disagreement, now spoke with understanding. Their words no longer weighted with regret or resentment. "You made the right choice, Elon," one cousin said, clapping his shoulder. "We see that now. This place, it would have been lost without you." Elon nodded, the simple acknowledgement settling into his chest like sunlight. It wasn't the money they remembered. It was the soil, the trees, the stories that lingered between them. Sophie danced between picnic blankets, her curls bouncing, a stack of carefully drawn pictures in her arms. One by one, she handed them to the guests, bright crayon sketch portraits of the vineyard, the family, the new tree in bloom. "They're for you," she said with the sincerity only a child could offer. "So you remember today." Her gifts were accepted with smiles, the drawings folded carefully and tucked into pockets and bags as though they were priceless treasures. Later, as the breeze softened and the afternoon settled into a golden lull, Alexis stood beneath the oak tree with a quiet certainty. She began to sing, a song she had learned long ago from her grandmother, one she had not sung since before the weight of loss had closed her throat. Her voice, tender and steady, threaded through the branches and across the picnic, a melody stitched with memory and longing. The guests paused, some closing their eyes, others holding hands as the notes settled around them. Elon watched his daughter, her dark brown hair catching the light, her strong, clear voice reaching towards something unseen. When the last note faded, the silence that followed was soft, reverent, full. And then came the applause, not loud or hurried, but deep and genuine. Elon felt a lump form in his throat. Not sadness, not anymore, just the profound ache of something fully present, fully alive. As the day wore on, Sophie tugged at his sleeve, her hazel eyes sparkling with discovery. "Daddy, look what I found," she said, opening her small palm to reveal a dirt-smudged locket. They carefully rinsed it with water from a glass jar. The small, oval metal glimmered faintly, its design intricate but worn by time. One of the older cousins recognized it immediately. "That's from great-grandmother's time. It was hers. It must have been lost in the soil years ago." The metal had returned to them, as if the earth itself had chosen this day to give it back. Elon turned it over in his hand, tracing its edges, feeling the unexpected weight of it, a weight that spoke of roots, of stories passed forward. He knelt beside Alexis, pressing the metal gently into her palm. "This belongs with you now," he said. "It's yours to keep, to carry forward." Alexis's fingers closed carefully around the locket, her eyes meeting his with a depth that required no words. In that quiet gesture, the history of their family, its fractures, its healings, had found a new keeper. Meanwhile, Sophie had gathered wildflowers from the edges of the meadow. She wove them into a small, uneven bouquet and placed them carefully on the backrest of their wooden bench, the bench they had built together, the one that now bore the carved words, "For what remains." "This is our safe place," she declared proudly, brushing stray petals into place. "Where we always belong." As the sun began its slow descent, guests lingered, reluctant to leave the comfort of this newly claimed tradition. Hugs lasted longer. Promises to return were made sincerely, not out of politeness, but from a rediscovered sense of home. Elon stood at a distance, watching as Alexis and Sophie walked ahead, their steps unhurried, their silhouettes softened by the falling light. A calm, steady pride settled over him, not for what he had built alone, but for what they had built together. He realized in that moment that the shape of their family had changed. It no longer clung to what had been lost, nor to what might have been. It had grown into something new, something rooted, something enduring. The tree they had planted continued to bloom quietly behind them, its branches shifting gently in the breeze, its blossoms falling like whispered blessings onto the grass. The picnic would end, the guests would part, but the belonging would remain, anchored not by the soil alone, but by the hands that had chosen to stay, to nurture, to grow. The land had not saved them. They had saved each other, and that was the true inheritance. The house was quiet in the way that feels whole, not hollow. The kind of silence that wraps around you rather than presses in. Elon Musk sat at his small desk by the window, the familiar weight of his leather-bound journal resting beneath his hand. The pages were worn now, their edges soft from the many times he had turned to them, seeking, recording, listening to his own unfolding. He opened to the last entry and read through the steady handwriting of his past self. There, tucked between reflections and everyday details, was Samuel's letter, the cousin who had once pushed him to sell and later thanked him for staying. Elon traced the crease in the folded paper, remembering the shift, the slow, quiet transformation that had carried them to this moment. He picked up his pen and wrote the final line. Some losses teach us how to stay with what matters. There was no grand conclusion, no sweeping insight, just this, staying present, staying with the things worth tending. A soft knock pulled him from his thoughts. Sophie appeared in the doorway, barefoot as usual, her curls slightly tangled from her morning adventures in the garden. "Dad," she said, her hazel eyes bright with excitement. "I have an idea. I want to plant more trees. A whole row, right here at home." Elon's heart warmed immediately. That sounds perfect. This time, there was no hesitation, no mental tally of schedules or obligations. He said yes with his whole heart. Together, they selected young saplings and began planting along the edge of the yard. Sophie gave each tree a name, speaking to them as though they were old friends. Alexis arrived with her camera in hand, quietly capturing the way Sophie's small hands pressed soil around the roots, the way Elon knelt beside her, fully attentive, fully here. "They're going to grow together," Sophie whispered, patting the last tree. "Just like us." The days found their own rhythm. School mornings, family dinners, quiet Sundays spent tending to the garden or walking the familiar vineyard paths. The rush that had once driven Elon began to dissolve. He found peace in slow mornings, in the sound of his daughter's laughter filling the house, in the steady hum of an ordinary life well lived. Helen's absence remained, but it softened into something else, a presence woven into the fabric of their days. Her memory no longer arrived as a sharp ache, but as a gentle pulse, steady and kind, part of their conversations, part of the stories Sophie now told to the new trees. One night, Elon dreamed of her. In the dream, they were sitting side by side on the wooden bench at the vineyard, the same bench that bore the carving, for what remains. They didn't speak. There was no need. They sat in the silence they had never shared when she was alive, a silence that now felt like understanding. When he awoke, his chest wasn't heavy. It was full. The dream didn't haunt him. It anchored him. And then came the familiar call. "Dad," Sophie's voice chimed from a hallway. "Let's go get ice cream." There had been a time when he might have hesitated, caught between tasks. Now he smiled, already reaching for his keys. "Let's go." The three of them, Elon, Alexis, Sophie, walked through the quiet streets of Sonoma County, the sun dipping low, the evening breeze brushing gently across their faces. Their hands found each other easily, the kind of connection that didn't need words to feel real. Alexis joined them, her camera swinging softly from her shoulder, no longer used to collect evidence of what they were missing, but now a companion to the life they were building. The walk was slow, intentional. There was no rush to arrive anywhere. After ice cream, they returned to the vineyard, as if the land itself still called them back. They sat again on the wooden bench, the three of them shoulder to shoulder, their gaze resting on the wide horizon, framed by the blooming tree they had planted. It was here that Elon fully understood what had quietly grown beneath the surface. They weren't trying to return to what had been. They weren't reaching backward. They were creating something entirely new, something built from what had remained, from what they had chosen to stay for. The evening settled gently around them, the kind that lingers just a little longer, as if the sky itself understood that some moments need more time. When they returned home, they did something they hadn't done in a long while. They watched an old family movie again, the same one that once left them aching with grief. But this time it was different. They laughed where once they cried. They noticed things they had missed before, the way Helen's hand brushed Sophie's curls, the way Elon's younger self beamed in the background. They sat close, sharing a soft blanket, each carrying the quiet understanding that what mattered had never truly left them. It had simply changed shape. Elon glanced at his daughters, one leaning into his shoulder, the other resting her head against his arm. The room no longer echoed with what was missing. It was full, overflowing with what stayed. And in that fullness, in that imperfect, steady, present life, they found home. Deep viewer, sometimes the smallest memories stay with us the longest. I'd love to hear yours. Leave a memory in the comments that this story brought back for you. I read and respond everyone with care and gratitude.